we set up these 1/4 meter, this says 0.25 meters squared, these 1/4 meter quadrats. Okay. The field is too big for us to look at every single species. It's just too much time and energy. So what we did was go out to this abandoned field, and we set up these north-south transects, and these transects are being set up through the field like this. Along each transect, every, right, I think it's 15 meters, we set up a quadrat along the transect. And then we set it up so that the first one was set up on the edge, the next one set up on the edge, the next one on the edge, 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 edge. So we're always picking up some of this edge habitat, or what would be called the ecotone, right? Because this is forested area and this is a field. There's a very sharp ecotone that occurs where the two come together. We want to be sure that we sample periodically in this ecotone, since the ecotone itself might have some species that aren't in the field or in the forest. Okay? So if you look here, that gives us 245 quadrats. Okay? In each of these quadrats, we're looking at the identity of species, specifically vascular plants. Right? We're not looking at mosses or bryophytes, because I don't know anything about those things. Right? We're looking at the identity of species within each of these quadrats. And then we're also looking at the number of stems, which is the number of individuals, of each species in each of these quadrats. Okay? So the identity of species, the number of individuals of each species in each quadrat. So at the end of this process, right, of going through this field, 245 quadrats worth, over the summer of 2010, is we should have in our spreadsheet, quadrat 1, we would have species 1, species 2, all the way up to species X, and then here, 10 individuals of species 1, none of species 2, and maybe 4 of species X. So we would have a bunch of numbers along the row corresponding to each quadrat. Each column would be the number of individuals within a particular species, and that would be our record of each of the quadrats. Okay? Now, in trying to figure out richness, right, what we would do then is figure out the total number of species that were collected from all of the quadrats. Okay? We could just take, each column has a species name, and as long as one of these quadrats had at least one of each of those species, then the number of columns I have in the spreadsheet is representative of the richness, right? It's an estimate of the species richness. Now, one question I might ask is, well, what happens if you don't do a good enough job of setting up the quadrats? After all, we could have made our lives a lot easier, and instead of setting up 245 quadrats, what if instead we had set up 3 transects with 2 quadrats each, looked at that information for each of these 6 quadrats, and then said, ooh, look at that, based on the number of columns you have, there are 21 species within this community. And then the question is, am I likely to come up with a different number here based on the number of quadrats I actually use. The fewer quadrats I look at, the fewer species I'm likely to collect, particularly since, as I mentioned before, some species occur at very low frequency, right? If they're only found in a small portion of this field, and they're only in this area here, then I'm not going to see that species because it's not very frequent. It only occurs in a small area. Okay? All right, on the other hand, if I increase the number of quadrats, I'm likely to begin to pick up these more rare species that aren't as frequent and only occur in certain regions. If my field, even though it looks like one field to me, is actually in and of itself very diverse based on where you are spatially, maybe this area is wetter soil, maybe this marks two different types of bedrock material, right? In which case, there's some underlying patterns that I might expect to see that wouldn't be evident to me, and I certainly wouldn't pick that up if I just laid out 6 quadrats. Okay? So what we'll do is take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the idea of getting a good estimate of richness and how you can do that. Okay? All right, see you on the other side of the break.